Face to face. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meets with a top North Korean official to revive the nuclear summit. We have the latest. Safety and sympathy. The president is in Texas meeting with families affected by the latest school shooting. Fighting for sick children. The Vatican hospital is trying to protect terminally ill patients. And raising their voices. A group of nuns in Missouri finds a creative way to pay for a church expansion. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 31st, 2018.
I want it to be meaningful. It doesn't mean it gets all done at one meeting. Maybe you have to have a second or a third, and maybe we'll have none. But it's in good hands.
President Donald Trump says meetings in New York with a delegation from North Korea are going well. So well that the Vice Chairman Kim Jong-chol is now planning to travel to Washington to deliver a personal letter from Chairman Kim Jong-un. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. The president wouldn't say whether a deal is taking shape, but a high-ranking State Department official says both the U.S. and North Korea have now laid out what they want from a potential summit. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Pompeo says his meetings today with a top North Korean official went well and that they made good progress. They're trying to salvage that on-again, off-again summit between President Trump and the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un. Secretary Pompeo meets in New York for the second day of talks with Kim Jong-chol. He's the highest-ranking North Korean official to visit the U.S. in nearly 2 decades. The secretary saying on Twitter, the potential summit between POTUS and Chairman Kim presents North Korea with a great opportunity to achieve security and economic prosperity. The people of North Korea can have a brighter future, and the world can be more peaceful. But Kim Jong-un may have complicated talks after he complained to Russia's foreign minister about U.S. global dominance. Sergei Lavrov, for his part, says sanctions against North Korea should be lifted as part of the ongoing discussions. Daniel Davis, a North Korea expert, says Russia is trying to flex their muscle.
Russia's entering this from a position of weakness because they have historic and long-standing ties with North Korea. They want to make sure that their influence in the region throughout Northeast Asia is taken care of and is also, they don't lose influence, but they are losing influence.
South Korean media are speculating that Pompeo could soon make a third trip to Pyongyang. The former CIA chief traveled there twice in recent weeks. He says there's a shared understanding between the two sides about what they hope to achieve in talks.
One ought to be either surprised or frightened or deterred by moments where it looks like there are challenges and difficulties, things that can't be bridged. Our mission is to bridge them so that we can achieve this historic outcome.
Pompeo also confirms that Kim Jong-chol will be able to go to Washington tomorrow to deliver a letter to President Trump from North Korea's leader as well, although he did say today also that he's not sure if the summit happens, if it will happen exactly on June 12th as it was originally planned. Lauren.
Wyatt, North Korea's biggest ally and trading partner is China. How is China reacting to a potential summit?
Well, Lauren, Chinese officials are all in favor of the summit. They're calling on the United States to keep the on-planned June 12th date. And China has played, of course, a big role in all this in bringing North Korea to the table. They say this meeting is actually key to getting the North Koreans to giving up their nuclear weapons. Lauren. Correspondent
Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Joining me now is Dean Chang, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Dean, welcome back to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made a rare appearance in North Korea. What influence are those conversations having on a U.S.-North Korea summit?
That's a good question. Obviously, the Russians are playing a lot of different cards, and they typically playing them close to the vest. But looking at how Putin has operated around the world, he is almost certainly there to act as a spoiler, not as a facilitator. Russia has opened up fiber optic lines into North Korea. It has warned the U.S. to suspend military exercises. I think that the Russians are basically trying to curry favor with North Korea because they are trying to gain influence, not only at the expense of the United States, but also at the expense of China.
What concern does the U.S. have about exposing South Korea and our allies like Japan to a greater Chinese influence?
Well, the U.S. and China are engaged in a great power competition for influence over Northeast Asia. The Chinese have been pressuring the South Koreans to dilute their military commitment with the United States. They've really turned on the pressure to try and get South Korea to stop deploying the THAAD missile defense system. And Chinese-Japanese relations have generally been pretty much on the cool side for most of Prime Minister Abe's term and the last several Chinese leaders. So Chinese forces are regularly flying into Japanese airspace. There's a lot of tension going on right now, aside from North Korea, in that part of the world.
The U.S. wants, quote, and this is what Secretary Pompeo said, the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. How likely is that ever to happen, no matter if there is a summit or not?
Well, that's been the American position since 1994 and the agreed framework. Obviously, when you have one of the most opaque societies on Earth, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. That is presumably why we need the president and the North Korean leadership to be talking to each other. But honestly, I'm not particularly optimistic.
Earlier this week, I spoke with U.S. Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom, that's Sam Brownback, about the State Department's latest religious freedom report and North Korea's troubling record. Here's how he described conditions there.
It's a terrible situation for way too many people there, and it's hardest particularly on the Christians in North Korea.
How does Pompeo's position in an administration committed to advancing global religious freedom help or hurt these negotiations?
Well, I think that one of the things that is important, especially for prisoners of conscience in places like North Korea, is to know that they are not forgotten. And if the president, if Secretary Pompeo, if American negotiators bring this issue up, it is a signal to North Korea that we're not simply in this for complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization. Even if you do that, that does not alleviate you from fulfilling your other obligations of basic human right.
Dean Chang, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
President Trump travels to Texas to meet privately with families of some of the 10 people killed in a school shooting this month. The White House says the president was moved by the tragedy and wanted to extend his condolences personally. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Students just returned to class this week after the shooting at Santa Fe High School outside Houston, Texas on May 18th. The latest violence is putting pressure on President Trump to keep kids safe, and America's Catholic bishops are calling for action. The commander-in-chief arriving in Houston to console grieving families. This month's school shooting in Santa Fe, Texas is just one of more than a half dozen since February's deadly attack in Parkland, Florida. We've also seen shootings in Alabama, Maryland, California, Illinois, Georgia, and Indiana.
One thing that affects mine and other students' mental health is to worry about the fact that we or our friends could get shot at school.
In a White House briefing on Wednesday, a 13-year-old from California asked Press Secretary Sarah Sanders what the administration will do to end the tragedies. Sanders, a mother of 3, got emotional.
As a kid and certainly as a parent, there is nothing that could be more terrifying for a kid to go to school and not feel safe. So I'm sorry that you feel that way. This administration takes it seriously.
President Trump assigned Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to lead a new federal commission on school safety. The group held its first field visit today at an elementary school near Baltimore.
Students and educators alike understandably fear that this could happen in their own school. Parents dread getting a phone call that too many other parents have experienced.
For years, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has called for action to end gun violence. Michael O'Rourke is a USCCB policy advisor.
At the end of the day, this is about human life.
Among the bishop's proposals, an assault weapons ban, universal background checks, and limiting the purchasing of handguns.
The bishops have promoted reasonable measures of gun control to promote the value of human life and peace in our communities.
U.S. Catholic bishops also support setting what they call a more appropriate minimum age requirement for gun ownership and a ban on bump stocks. Lauren?
Mark, the president already ordered the Department of Justice to work to ban bump stocks. Will he support further gun control measures?
It seems unlikely. Just this month, he spoke at the National Rifle Association's annual convention. He said Second Amendment rights will never be under siege as long as he is president. The president has said he wants to improve school safety. He's even talked about arming teachers, but he has not called for any new gun control legislation. Lauren.
White House correspondent Mark Irons, thank you. President Trump says he will pardon conservative author and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza. Trump writes on Twitter that D'Souza, quote, was treated very unfairly by our government. The 57-year-old pleaded guilty in 2014 to violating campaign finance laws. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation and paid a $30,000 fine. And the president says he's considering commuting the sentence of ex-Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich and pardoning Martha Stewart. The Democrat was found guilty of corruption and began a 14-year sentence in 2012. Stewart was convicted in 2004 of obstructing justice and lying to the government. Louisiana Governor John Bel Edwards, a pro-life Democrat, has signed into law a bill limiting abortion after 15 weeks. The legislation passed overwhelmingly in both chambers of the Louisiana legislature. The law will only take effect if a similar law in neighboring Mississippi is upheld by the courts. Gunmen opened fire yesterday on protesters during a massive march against the Nicaraguan government. After the violence, protests erupted with fires being set on the streets of Managua, the capital. Gunmen have not been identified. Human rights observers say more than 80 people have been killed amid a harsh crackdown by the government on protests that began in April. Electrical workers in Puerto Rico are scrambling to finish their work ahead of hurricane season, which begins tomorrow. Officials worry the power grid will fail again. Last year, Hurricane Maria caused the longest blackout in U.S. history. It left the entire island of 3.3 million people without power, including patients in hospitals and nursing homes. The Catholic Church, Australia's largest denomination, has become the first non-government institution to commit to a national plan to compensate victims of child sex abuse. 4 in 5 victims will be eligible to benefit from the $2.9 billion proposal. Other groups who signed up include the Anglican Church, Salvation Army, Scouts Australia, and the YMCA. Pope Francis denounces a culture of cover-up and abuse in a letter to Catholics in Chile. He also regrets that neither he nor the country's bishops listened to the victims of the scandal. The news comes as Vatican investigators who uncovered wide-scale sexual abuse are going back to the country on a pastoral visit. The officials will visit the diocese led by Bishop Juan Barros, who is accused of ignoring claims of clergy abuse. And the Vatican Children's Hospital drafts a new charter to protect the rights of children with incurable diseases. The move comes 1 month after the death of terminally ill toddler Alfie Evans. He was at the center of a legal battle over his medical treatment in Britain. Pope Francis met Alfie's father just weeks before his parents lost their fight to keep him on life support. They wanted him to be admitted to a Vatican hospital. Alfie was even granted Italian citizenship. Vatican correspondent Juliet Lindley joins us from Rome. Juliet, what does this charter say?
Lauren, it consists of 10 articles, and essentially it says that children with incurable diseases have the right to a second opinion and to better diagnostics, as well as compassionate care when they're dying, palliative care. And it also says that they have the right to better experimental treatments and to be moved across international borders. The document was presented at a Vatican conference this week, at which the head of the Pontifical Academy for Life, Archbishop Vincenzo Paglia, talked about how absurd it is for a judge's sentence to overcome the relationship between parent and child. Clearly, he was referring to Alfie Evans' case.
Is this just a recommendation or is it legally binding?
It's purely symbolic, Lauren. Make no mistake, this is the Vatican's pediatric hospital certifying its holistic approach to the human being that every Catholic-inspired hospital adheres to, essentially. It's putting into writing the long-standing principles regarding terminally ill children that Catholic hospitals put into practice. So those principles include putting human dignity of every patient first and safeguarding the rights of parents to make informed decisions for their own children.
Our White House correspondent yesterday reported that President Trump signed the Right to Try law, which helps terminally ill patients seek experimental medication. This is what the families of Alfie Evans and Charlie Gard wanted to do in the UK, but they weren't allowed to. So how would this charter, even if it's just a recommendation, avoid cases like that in the UK?
Lauren, that remains to be seen. Certainly here in Italy, when those toddlers' cases came to the fore, there was a sense that, in a way, we are fortunate to have bioethical commissions here, which patients' families can turn to in delicate medical circumstances, whereas in the UK, it's a judge that rules. The novelty here is that the document refers specifically to kids with incurable illnesses, and it includes the right to care when a patient is dying, and also to spiritual, psychological support for the family, and saying that children have the right to be moved to other countries, which was an option that was not available and that was not granted by the British judicial system to Alfie and to Charlie Gard. Charlie Gard was another terminally ill British toddler who was caught in a legal battle last year over his treatment, and he wasn't allowed to go abroad, and he died at the age of 11 months. So, Lauren, unless the British hospitals follow Bambino Gesù, the pediatric hospital here at the Vatican's guidelines or their charter, this is not going to necessarily change anything with cases such as Alfie's in the UK.
It would have to come from a judge in the UK. They'd have to change their court system. All right. Thank you for clarifying. Juliette Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent.
Lauren, thank you.
Coming up, we continue our preview of the midterm elections with an in-depth look at Indiana, plus a newly released album by Benedictine nuns. The Catholic Diocese of Portland is reportedly leaving Maine's Council of Churches. The council will begin taking public stands on issues, including ones involving the LGBTQ community. The board will issue statements by majority vote. That prompted the diocese's decision to leave. Americans have 6 months to make up their minds about who they will cast their ballot for in the midterm elections. We've been trekking across the U.S. to one of the key battleground states to find out what issues are most important to voters. We find Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi on the ground in Elkhart, Indiana. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. Here in Elkhart, Indiana, RV manufacturing rules the road. But back in 2008, the economy crashed. The unemployment rate here rose to about 20%. Nearly 1 in 5 people were out of work. But now the economy has changed course. The unemployment rate here is now about 2.5%. So how will this change in course impact this fall's election? Elkhart, Indiana's economy is booming 9 years after an economic crisis.
Now they're building businesses and they're actually adding on to what they had, and they're hiring hundreds of people.
Professor Walter Nagorski, who specializes in political science, says the robust economy here could benefit candidates this November.
The boost to the economy in recent years means that that particular issue should play well in terms of incumbents.
In Indianapolis, a business owner is closely watching his state's Senate race, one of the country's closest contests. Jim Sweeney favors Republican businessman and state lawmaker Mike Braun over Democratic incumbent Joe Donnelly.
As long as you're there to get business going, get businesses here, make it more economical to have tax structure that's going to, want businesses to move here, then that's what it's all about.
At Divine Mercy Catholic Bookshop in South Bend, Jen Towers is clear about what issue is most important to her.
Our main issue is being pro-life. We really believe that life starts at conception and ends at natural death. We believe in all life, the young and the old. And as Catholics, life is the issue, the main issue.
Polls before the 2016 presidential election revealed that the economy was the #1 issue for voters. The exit polls were quite stunning. Of the Democrats, nearly 80% said the economy was excellent. That number was completely different for Republicans. Nearly 80% found the economy was poor. So how will this all play out in this midterm election? We'll be monitoring that for the next 6 months. Lauren?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting in Elkhart, Indiana. Thank you, Jason. A pro-life investigative group is accusing Planned Parenthood of covering up child sexual abuse and human trafficking. Live Action alleges managers were promised training on recognizing signs of sex abuse, but instead learned how to tell if they were being secretly filmed on the job. And the group is asking Congress to investigate. For more on this story, visit our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. Up next, the Catholic response to the Me Too movement. And a group of nuns in Missouri finds a church expansion is music to their ears. Pope Francis asks his envoy to the shrine at Medjugorje to remain on the job indefinitely. The statement made no mention of the years-long investigation into whether the Marian apparitions in Bosnia are authentic. In 1981, 6 young people reported having visions of Mary. Charges of sexual harassment against disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein began a revolution, now known as the Me Too movement. Today in Washington, Catholic leaders shared their thoughts on the sexual revolution. Leading experts from across the country in law, medicine, and the social sciences took part. Yesterday, I sat down with one of the panelists. Joining me now is Mary Eberstadt, Senior Research Fellow at the Faith and Reason Institute. That's a Catholic think tank. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Lauren.
Welcome back, I should say. The Me Too movement has seen the fall of powerful men across the globe. Is there a Catholic response to the Me Too movement?
Well, I think a lot of Catholics are having an uncanny feeling these days watching these men fall from grace. This is the 50th anniversary year of Humanae Vitae, as we all know. And Humanae Vitae predicted that in a world where the sexual revolution took hold, men would have less respect for women and there would be a lowering of moral standards.
This was Pope Paul VI encyclical at the time, which was heralded as an amazing document.
Yes, and also a very controversial one, of course. It reiterated 2,000 years of church teaching on these matters, and that teaching is very unpopular in a lot of places, as we know. But getting back to Me Too, what does it tell us? It tells us that man after man has serially harassed and abused women, thinking that all women are sexually available. In other words, no pill, no Me Too movement. That is the common denominator in all of these cases, is that these men thought they could treat women as interchangeable sexual units. Why would they think that? Because of the ubiquity of birth control. So that's one important way in which the teaching of the church ties into the Me Too movement.
Well, if you accept the concept that the sexual revolution was harmful to women, what can women do to reverse the trend?
Well, the first thing they can do is stop being bamboozled. One of the most striking things about these cases is that man after man was tied to the progressive movement, tied to pro-abortion politics, sometimes in a very public way. So this kind of progressivism has become a fig leaf for predation. And a lot of women have bought into the storyline that if a man says he's pro-woman and pro-abortion, therefore he's good for women. Well, these cases show us that there's something wrong with that logic.
Let's take a look to Ireland, which just passed a referendum allowing abortion up to 12 weeks. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think what the Irish case shows is what we've seen in the United States and elsewhere, which is abortion politics is not politics as usual. All those people out in Dublin in the streets, pumping their fists in the air, screaming, crying, behaving like they were in a frenzy, these are people in the throes of a religious movement. We have to understand that this kind of secularist progressivism that's
is a
grounded,
religion?
It is a rival faith to Christianity, which is why it is locked in mortal combat with Christianity all over the place, including most recently in Ireland. So we have to understand these are people in possession of a quasi-religious worldview.
Fascinating. You're also a prolific author. You've written extensively about the sexual revolution. We're so grateful for your time here on EWTN News Nightly. Mary Eberstadt.
Thank you, Lauren.
A community of Benedictine nuns in Missouri has released a new music album dedicated to St. Joseph. The nuns say they have a special devotion to St. Joseph, who has helped them a great deal in recent months. The album includes 22 tracks, 8 are original pieces. Funds will support the construction of a new church for their convent. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night and God bless you.